This is Castle in the Sky by Robert Reed. When I was 8 years old, my best friend lived a few doors down the street, a little black-haired kid named Donnie Warner. Donnie was about as shy as anybody I've ever known. He was desperately sweet. I always enjoyed my time with him. His toys were different from my toys, which is a major selling point among kids. We didn't fight about anything, which means one of us probably got his way more often than not. And that was probably me, I should confess. But I don't remember being particularly bossy. I'm halfway sure that Donnie equally enjoyed my company. There was a long stretch during third grade when he came up to my house almost daily to visit me and to escape from his own difficult home. My parents and other gossipy adults talked about Donnie's family. The Warners didn't have much money, it seemed. I'd heard words like weird and crazy to define life under their roof. Nobody sat me down to explain why that was, but I always assumed it was because the mother was stuck home alone with 4 kids. Donnie was the oldest. There were 2 baby sisters. There were also various cats and a young golden retriever rescued from the pound. A dog meant for Donnie, and my friend rarely showed interest in the beast. There was a father, too, but he frequently traveled for work. On those rare occasions when I played at the Warner house, things seemed noisy, but not exceptionally strange. The only genuine oddity, at least to my mind, was that both the adults were into religion. Every room had at least one crucifix watching over it. On Sunday mornings, the entire family, dressed up in their best clothes, piled into an elderly Oldsmobile station wagon, driving off to visit their church and demanding God. One evening, a Monday evening, Donnie walked to my house and rang the bell. Then, with his usual shy politeness, asked my mother if I could play for a little while. My mom had other ideas. I was sitting in the kitchen, using a glue stick and plain cardboard to erect a spectacularly ugly castle. My assignment was due at 8:30 in the morning sharp. "Tell your buddy hello and goodbye," Mom barked at me. "Then get back in here. I'm not doing any piece of this work." I stepped onto our little concrete porch to explain things. Donnie was never angry. He had deer-like eyes, big and always edging into depression. And since 8-year-old boys usually don't notice things like sadness, it must have been pretty miserable to get my empathy flowing. On that particular night, his voice was softer than usual. His father had just flown to Memphis, he explained. Gone until the end of the week. I couldn't see why that mattered, but I said, "Okay," and then, "Huh?" Donnie listened while I described my castle, and I asked if he had his project done, and he said, "Yeah." Except it didn't sound like an answer to my question. It was polite noise. I could tell he wasn't really listening to me, which made me a little angry. Then he asked me if he could hang out in my room and play with my Game Boy. It didn't seem to matter what he was doing, so long as he was close to me. I just kept telling him that I shouldn't and he couldn't. Sorry. Our school project was the only thing that mattered now. I was really tired of my mother staring at us through the storm door. "I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, Donnie?" He just nodded, giving me a weak smile, and wandered off. I returned to the kitchen and finished the castle's brown walls and a couple of tilted towers and sticking a pennant or 2 on the top. I called it quits. Maybe I felt bad about brushing him off. Maybe I just wanted help lugging my project to school. Either way, I stopped by Donnie's house that next morning, ringing the bell until I was sure nobody was going to answer. Then I picked up my castle again and carefully went down the steps, pausing on the driveway for a few seconds, finally noticing the warm, faintly damp smell of car exhaust. Fumes were pushing their way out from under the garage door, although I didn't realize it at the time. I thought it was funny, smelling a car but not seeing one. Then I turned and marched off toward third grade, which saved me. I didn't have to discover something truly awful. Because I was saved from one horrific pain, the rest of my life had been spent struggling with a relentless, almost unbearable sense of guilt. Lifting the garage door would have done nothing, of course. By then it was too late, and I'm an idiot to blame myself. Donnie and his mother and his 4-year-old brother and his twin baby sisters were sitting in the station wagon that was parked in the darkened garage, all dead, along with that dog that he didn't care about and a bunch of cats, too. On occasion, inauspicious beginnings lead to large accomplishments. As I grew older, I cultivated an unsuspected talent for designing castles and other fortifications. Most of my early projects can't be discussed since they involved military bunkers hidden in undisclosed locations. But a few public buildings were my handiwork, each structured, brawny yet elegant, special concretes and reinforced stone peppered with a minimum of windows, all wrapped around internal skeletons designed to withstand fertilizer bombs and baby nukes. After retiring from government work, I made a tidy fortune building mansions for wealthy clients. My largest job was never finished. Just a few months after we broke ground on the king's new palace, there was a sudden shift in Arabian politics. But then the Israelis came to my rescue, snatching me up as a consultant, wanting my help with our constantly evolving East Wall. It was lucrative work, challenging and endless. That was one of the reasons why I said no thank you when my government showed up at my door. "But you haven't heard the offer," the representative said, and she smiled winsomely, adding, "I think you'll find it intriguing." "All right, try me," I said. Her name was Colonel Sutter, though she'd given me permission to call her Catherine. With a crisp, practiced tone, Catherine mentioned a significant project, and she offered an address that was sure to pique my interest. Most definitely. I heard the word moon. 6 bases were established on our sister planet. China and the EU, Japan and Russia each had their one. And there were 2 American facilities, one dedicated to science while the other was being built by the military. "Craig," she said, "we would love your help." Catherine used my name with that false familiarity salesmen employ while praying for a commission. "You're one of the finest structural engineers in the world," she told me. "You're first on my list, and frankly, I don't even know who I'd rank number 2. She was lying. I learned that soon afterwards. 2 former colleagues had already been approached. But one had a young family he didn't want to abandon, while the other, poor man, was freshly diagnosed with liver cancer. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You want to hire me at a very competitive rate, Craig, yes. And to earn my money, I'll live at the lunar base and do what? Help finish the base construction, I'm guessing. And what would be wrong with that?" I couldn't see anything wrong, but she hadn't answered my question either, which set off alarms. "Here's the problem," I explained. "Much as I'd love to travel in space, in particular bounce across another world, I also know that building habitats on the moon is relatively simple work. You drag prefabricated structures up where you want them, and you bury your new city under the regolith. A few meters of packed ground protect people and the machines from the solar and cosmic radiation, which are the important hazards. Basically, you need to be about as sophisticated as a kid with a plastic shovel and a beach full of sand. And that's why I have to ask, why would you have any use for me?" Catherine said nothing, but she smiled in a certain way. That's when I noticed that she was handsome, at least for a woman who had spent her vital years inside a uniform. Finally, I admitted, "Of course, I've heard some interesting rumors." "About our new base?" "Really?" she replied, feigning surprise. I nodded. "We've got some stubborn international treaties down here. Nations aren't free to test whatever new and theoretical weapon systems they want to test. But those rules might not apply on the moon. At least according to certain government lawyers, they don't." "Is that what you've heard?" Looking at Catherine's gray eyes, I admitted, "I still know a few bodies at the Pentagon. 1 or 2 have mentioned plans to melt mountains and blast new craters with gamma-ray lasers on super-clean nukes. Or we've developed an easy way to make antimatter bombs, and you're digging some very deep holes to set them off into safe, out-of-view places." Only the gray eyes smiled. "Is that what you want from me? You want help building secret, robust test chambers?" "Not at all," she promised. "Really?" I was honestly surprised. Once again, Catherine said, "Craig," with that best-of-friends voice, "you're an exceptionally qualified structural engineer." "And you're still not making much sense," I complained. "Maybe we don't want you to build anything. Then what good am I?" The smiling eyes waited. "Okay, how's this?" And I fired the last round in my arsenal. "I know how to construct strong, durable structures. So maybe you're hoping that I can make my expertise run backwards." "Which means what?" "It's happened in the past," I confessed. "Military boys come to me wanting clues how to destroy a Korean or Pakistani bunker. Is that the kind of game we're playing? Are you deciding how best to hit the Chinese facilities? An interesting speculation, and no. Catherine shook her head while grinning. We don't necessarily want to attack anybody. We would appreciate your help gaining access to a particularly difficult structure. What structure? But now, how can I tell you that? She asked. Then she leaned close enough to feel too close, saying, Some secrets are too large, even to somebody with your security clearance. My heart was hammering, my breath quickening. When? I asked. You leave for the moon as soon as you pass your physical. No, I mean, when do I get told the truth? Catherine sat back, her eyes filling that handsome early middle-aged face. When you're standing beside your target, and we'll tell you everything we know, which I have to warn you is not very much at all. My religious upbringing was decidedly minimal. In our household, Christ wasn't a religious figure so much as a political one. My parents would never have voted for him. Religious holidays were either ignored, or in the case of Christmas, drained of their history and passion, with a few presents thrown at my sister and me as a bribe. Other cultures seem to have their own ideas about God, but it's hard to hold opinions when you doggedly ignore everyone else. Only in exceptional cases did we visit churches. Weddings were one excuse, only if they involved close friends or the immediate family. And with funerals, the same restrictions applied. Plus, my parents had to actually like the deceased, which meant that a peculiar family living down the block, and even the boy who was briefly my best friend, were not worthy of suits and nice dresses and a visit to anyone's house of worship. I wanted to attend the service. We can sit in back, like we did at my cousin's wedding, I promised. We don't even have to pretend to pray or talk in tongues or anything. My folks shared a different opinion. Do you know why she did what she did? My father asked, Donnie's mother. Do you know what she wrote in her suicide note? God, Mom snapped. She wrote that God wanted her and her children to come live in heaven. That's why she killed everybody. Dad said, the woman was profoundly depressed. There's nothing profound about any of this, Mom told us. Well, I won't go inside that stupid church, my sister piped in. She was 16 and relentlessly opinionated, assuring everyone at the dinner table, I hate everything about that idiot religion of theirs. The paternalistic tone, or that mind control crap. I don't want anything to do with those crazy people. You're talking about my friend, I mentioned. Mom noticed the discomfort on my face. I'm sorry, Craig. This is an awful situation, and Donnie was just unlucky. Nothing was his fault. He just had the misfortune of being born to a couple of exceptionally crazy parents. I used to think my folks were crazy, but in the midst of negotiations, I knew better than to mention that possibility. Do you know what his dad's doing now? My sister asked. I'd heard that Donnie's father returned to town on the next flight, but I hadn't seen him yet. He's living inside that awful house, she reported. Can you believe it? With all those ghosts running around? There's no such thing as ghosts, Father corrected her. You know what I mean. And she shook her head scornfully, adding, I read it in the paper. He says everything that happened was God's will. Everything everywhere is God's will. He's a creature of faith, and he can't question God's design, since he knows that his family is in a better place, underground, Mom blurted, in boxes. He can sleep and he can pray, and feels God's good hand. On her mellowest day, my sister was a passionate creature. 8 years my senior, we were never confused for being close. And there was something about that moment, listening to her words, feeling her barely restrained rage, makes the rest of her life even more memorable, ominous and ironic. 2 years later, during her freshman year at college, my atheistic sister converted to a West Coast cult. Our parents promised themselves it was a rebellious stage, a blatant, clumsy attempt to hurt them in the worst possible way. For years and years, they maintained that dogged faith of theirs. My sister contacted them only when she needed money. They always gave her some lesser amount. That's how they convinced themselves they were strong, solid people. And just to be safe, they kept one bedroom waiting for my sister, since someday, sure as the sun comes and goes, she was going to realize her mistake, break free of that evil, money-grubbing sect. Our parents died before I turned 40, within weeks of each other. My middle-aged sister was still avoiding the funerals, it seemed. But shortly after the final scattering of ashes, she called me. she needed an infusion of cash. There were vague living expenses and ill-defined debts, and when that particular hymn didn't work, she claimed she was seriously ill and desperate for an unmentionable operation. My response was a godly silence. After a few blistering curses, she hung up. After several more failed solicitations, the calls ceased. As far as I know, my sister still wears the odd robes of her contrived faith, living as part of a thriving commune tucked into the backmost portion of Wyoming. Though perhaps I'm the fool here, and the mothership finally arrived, the believers now streaking happily towards the holy temple orbiting Alpha Centauri. My own journey into space was spellbinding, as close to transcendence as this old atheist will ever achieve, I kept telling myself. And the moon proved to be a wonderland, spectacularly dead and gorgeously drabbed. Within the hour, my host took me out to see this mysterious structure. Catherine drove the buggy with me sitting beside her, Pentagon suits plus 3 of the mission's top scientists filling the seats behind us. The others were speaking with familiar, slightly bored voices. Our destination was a low lump of some exceptionally smooth material, happened to wear the same general grayness as the surrounding moonscape. Most of the object was subsurface, a spherical body a little less than 1 kilometer in diameter, resembling a child's toy ball, buried and forgotten on a very dry beach. It was by no means an impressive sight. What amazed me was the array of tools and weapons that had been left scattered across the scene. I saw broken drills and burnt-out lasers, these 2 plasma guns, plus abandoned rail guns, and their shattered projectiles, and rocket casings, and an assortment of bomb-making supplies. There's even somebody's broken ball-peen hammer lying on the sterile dust. Judging by the boot prints and wheel marks, every person who lived at the base had taken his or her crack at the target. Everybody eventually gave up, standing aside while others wasted their inventiveness and all that useless muscle trying to crack a shell that refused to break. Catherine parked beside the slick gray body. With a nod, she signaled the team's leader to come forward. Dr. Nathan Peck was half my age, tall, gawky, and unhandsome polymath. On his worst day, he was relentlessly brilliant. I soon learned enough about the man to feel sure I'd never met anyone with half his intellectual gifts. He was a world-class physicist with a strong grounding in both information technologies and biology, and he knew enough mathematics to teach it to professors in the Ivy League. Make no mistake about it, Peck saw no need to bring a simple nuts-and-bolts engineer into his playground. He told me as much. Kneeling beside me, he began by shaking my hand and remarking, "Of course, you aren't my idea. I really don't see how you could even hope to help us." "Maybe I'll surprise you," I offered. His response was a rolling of the eyes and a hard stare at our shared conundrum. I asked him for details. It was Catherine who supplied answers. She recited the object's dimensions and total volume, plus some very broad estimates of its mass and density. Meteorites had left no mark on its surface. Human beings had pumped fabulous amounts of energy onto its face, oftentimes in the same few square centimeters. Yet the only credible result was a slight increase in the body's overall temperature. "The entire structure warms up?" I asked. "It's highly conductive to heat, we think." She risked a glance in Peck's direction. "Isn't that what you told me, Doctor?" "Something like that." The young man nodded and with a grudging tone added, "Maybe you've got ideas about this thing's composition. A fresh perspective would be helpful. Unless it isn't, of course." Usually it takes me an entire day to dislike somebody, but Peck wasn't a creature who wasted time. I asked obvious questions. "We can't analyze what we can't sample," he responded. "We haven't even got a taste." He shook his head. "Lasers and plasma beams should have kicked loose individual atoms." I brought this up with a palatable frustration. Peck said, "Don't you think we'd have thought of that?" "Sorry," I said with a distinctly unsorry tone. Then, aiming for humor, I asked, "So what do you call it? The Sentinel?" It was an old joke, apparently. "That would be a poor official name," Catherine warned, "since it contains what might be useful information." Standard military thinking. "Castle Rock," said the resident general. "That's its official designation, at least for the moment. We're actively leaking misinformation, keeping people thinking about weapons tests and that sort of bullshit." Everybody was pressed against the windows. watching an object that refused to notice our existence. What about the surrounding ground? I asked nobody in particular. Does the land tell us anything about the object's age, or give clues about who could have placed it here? We've used every available tool, Catherine promised. Nothing about the megalith is unusual, on the bedrock beneath it for that matter. There's no credible trace of excavations or disruptions of any significant kind. We're still doing a full survey of the deepest rock, Peck added. 6 angled shafts are being dug. As manpower and machinery allow, we're naturally studying the sphere's surface. In case you find a doorway, I interjected. Peck had a grating way of lifting one side of his mouth, snarling at the world. But his voice was soft and hopeful when he admitted that would be nice. If not a doorway, at least some kind of guidepost. Another 15 minutes were spent retracing the project's brief, frustrating history. Then we drove back to the buried base. I've gone for rides on nuclear submarines, and offer their crews more spacious quarters than we enjoyed in that camp. I was escorted to a tiny cabin I'd share with 3 military boys, each of whom, fortunately, worked staggered 20-hour shifts. For the moment, I was alone, so I took the chance to lie down. Drifting towards sleep, my head began playing with the information that I'd been fed. There were little moments when it seemed as if intuition was working. Some creative portion of me was feeling confident that I'd soon figure this problem out. Fate, or my own relentless talent, would decipher the perfect solution, I kept telling myself, and of course, as a consequence, I would earn a hero's pleasures. Then I was asleep, dreaming about nothing important. A hand shook me awake. The first thought was that one of my bunkmates was home. But as I sat up, a woman's voice said my name. I heard, "Craig," wrapped inside an important tone. Then Catherine knelt closer, happily telling me, "You brought us luck, Craig. We just found our doorway. It's not large, but it's not that difficult to reach either. From what we can tell, it leads all the way inside." While Donnie was alive, his father didn't enjoy any real presence in the neighborhood. But after his family was dead, the man quit his traveling job. For 2 years, he lived alone inside that ghostly house. I occasionally saw him mowing his weeds or dragging his garbage can to the curb and back again. In unsettling ways, the man resembled my dead friend. They both had the same black hair and a similar wiry build. Sometimes there was shyness in Mr. Warner's stance, the way he didn't quite look anybody in the eye. But one day, he forced himself to stare into my eyes. I was walking home from school. He stopped his mower and strode down to the street to ask me with a flat, simple voice, "Did you know my son?" I nodded. An invisible hand clamped over my throat. "I thought so," he said. And he conjured up a big smile, telling me, "Donnie had some nice games, toys, so I was wondering if you'd like to take a few of them home with you." I was 10 years old, which meant that beneath my skin was a rich, instinctive greed. The man was offering free trinkets. I couldn't find any worthy reason to say no thank you. So I nodded, and he said, "Come on, then." He led me to his house. Without pets or a family, the little split level felt spacious. The furniture hadn't changed, and judging by appearances, Donnie's father was a fairly determined house cleaner. Smiling in a big way, he asked if I wanted water or maybe some milk. I told him, "No, thank you." Instantly felt thirsty. We walked down the brief hallway while he asked what kind of toys I preferred. "All kinds," I said, though an unexpected doubt was waiting inside me. What was I doing here? How did I agree to this? And he opened the first door on the left, ushering me into a darkened little bedroom once shared by 2 small boys. Suddenly I was sad and a little sick, standing in the middle of that gloomy quiet. Donnie's father hovered behind me. I heard him muttering, turned to find his hands together and his head dipped, his wide, thick-lipped mouth whispering a prayer or two to our Holy Father. Donnie had slept in the top bunk. Thorough hands had put away every toy, wicker boxes, and various shelves jammed full. I studied the assembled pleasures, then realized that my greed had abandoned me. The prayers stopped. Kneeling beside me, Mr. Warner said, "Take whatever you want. I'm sure my boy would approve." But I was 10 years old. Nothing that I saw would entertain a wise, worldly man like me. "Here," he said, handing me a drawing tablet. The tablet looked old, second or third hand old. It His face had been wiped clean innumerable times with a built-in magnet, but still making out faint gray lines that Johnny or somebody had drawn years ago. "No, thank you," I muttered. "Or this," he said, offering me a toddler's plastic puzzle. It hadn't belonged to my friend, unless Donnie had played with it before I knew him, then surrendered it to his younger brother. But I took the simple object in my hand and held tight, and I felt the kneeling man pushing his shoulder against my shoulder. Quietly he said, "I am very sorry for you." I made a vague chirping noise. "Sorry for you and your family," he told me. "When you die, the four of you will be transported directly to hell." I let the puzzle drop to the floor unnoticed. The man put an arm around my shoulder and said, "Join me." My stomach hurt and every breath burned. "Pray," he said to me, "accept our Savior into your life." I said nothing, but the ensnaring arm was pressing me toward the floor. In another moment or two, I would have found myself trapped in the most difficult circumstances. I imagined being coaxed to say a few kind words about Jesus. Even if I didn't mean, the floodgates would open. Against my will, I would begin an inexorable fall into the clutches of the Christian faith. That's why I used my elbow, popping the man on his chin, and then I jumped away. With the gracelessness of youth, I told him that he was a crazy bastard and he fucking well better leave me alone. Beneath Catherine's navel lay the neat, almost lovely arc of a C-section scar, softened by time, but still discernible under careful fingers. We spoke often about it, but never with words. There were my touches and curious looks, to which she replied with a hard gaze that left no doubt that this was one topic that my current lover refused to discuss. Then came a purposeful silence and mutual discomfort, a sense of some taboo being avoided. I think she hoped that I would feel ashamed. Maybe something awful was shaming her. Either way, the emotions would fill her tiny cabin, and there was almost no air to breathe. Being female among 100 youngish males, Catherine had been granted a princess's life, at least as far as possible on the Spartan moon. She and the other 6 ladies on the base each had their own quarters, tiny cubicles physically removed from the male habitats. Vague troubles at the other American base had brought about this inadequate arrangement, I was told. I was also informed that I was handsome and a fine lover. She assured me that she was grateful for having a friend such as me. Her word, friend. She appreciated decent older gentlemen who had experienced life yet somehow retained their humor. Yet my age and alleged wisdom kept me from feeling too proud. I was rumored to be wealthy, which no doubt made me attractive. Unlike most of the males kicking around the place, I had no uniform or rank to mess up the career of a female officer. By accepting my company, Catherine had an ally who was grateful and compliant, who also had ample time on his hands. My government job had come to an end even before I began to work. The castle's door, it seemed, had been open all along. But freighting my old body home again would cost too much in terms of fuel and effort, not to mention raise a few security concerns. That's why I was marooned here. I was trapped. Had nothing to do with my days but act pleasant, keep out of the way, and wait for my lover's return. We avoided uncomfortable talk about scars and psychic wounds. Our old lives were on a left-behind world. They didn't matter here. What mattered was the latest news from Castle Rock. What secrets had been discovered during the last hours? How was the mapping of passageways going? Had they found more of those indescribable machines? Dozens of contraptions were set inside the deepest chambers, silently doing nothing, except, of course, creating a host of unanswerable questions that were frustrating everyone involved. "What's the latest wrong theory?" I would ask. That was our little joke. These great minds were sharing our air and had been generating hypotheses at a staggering rate, only to toss them aside when they proved wrong, or even worse, untestable. "What is Peck's head thinking today?" I wondered aloud. "Is it an old castle or a very young one?" "Old," she reported, "nearly as old as the moon, which explains why it's buried as it is. The object fell to the surface while the crust was still liquid, nearly 4.5 billion years ago. It fell here and floated until the world froze up around it." The hypothesis had potential. I mentioned several tests to Catherine, who nodded and said, "Yes, I know. They're going over the data from the biggest kinetic blasts right now, hunting for definite numbers." In other words, Peck was trying to weigh his conundrum. But the next day, Catherine shook her head, halfway laughing when she admitted the numbers didn't work out. The castle's too dense, I guessed. Should have sunk into any magma sea. That's the reasonable assumption, she replied. Again, that was one of our jokes. What sounded reasonable never seemed to apply in these situations. I mean, it isn't a big lump of gold? According to several scales, she admitted, the sphere is about half as dense as water, meaning it would have floated on the molten moon like a child's inflated ball. Erosion covered it up, I offered. Peck has both of our geologists looking at that possibility. But to him and to me and just about everybody else, it seems more likely that someone took a giant spoon, carved out a round hole just big enough to bury the object most of the way. Which somebody? I asked. Every day, in one fashion or another, one just brought up that salient question. He doesn't want anyone using the A word, she warned. If you see him, don't mention it. Don't say alien, she meant. Peck doesn't want our perceptions contaminated, Catherine explained, her voice wearing a slightly mocking tone. If we assume little green starfarers, and that's all we're going to see, which would be a mistake, he claims. But who else could have done this? I asked. Shrugging her bare shoulders, she admitted, I have no idea. After some hard consideration, I said, well, I do. And I mentioned another candidate, God. She surprised me, saying, maybe, with a pleased, even relieved tone. Of course, I was joking. Ancient extraterrestrials are completely credible next to the Almighty. Taking a breath, I steered our conversation to safer, smaller matters. Have they found more tunnels? Not this week, no. Are there any new machines? For a few moments, she put on a wary expression. I was pushing too hard. Catherine suddenly remembered her rank and pledges and the secret nature of this very important business. She was very high in our local pecking order. It was her duty to properly chastise me. So I said nothing for the next several minutes, one arm wrapped around her stocky waist, my free hand touching a few favorite places. I knew the woman wanted to tell somebody what she knew, and who else was available to absorb her gossip. No new machines, she reported. The map's finished. And you can't see it, she warned. Just Peck and his people, the top officers, have access. Yeah, I had a pretty fair version of it sitting in my head. I'd drawn it from Catherine's description, stories overheard in the galley, and none of those important souls were allowed to see my map either. She told me, those machines, or whatever they are, they're our main focus for now. Again, I let silence ask my questions. And Peck believes one of them is working. She said those words, and when I didn't reply, she said, Craig, are you asleep? Not at all. One of the machines is awake, I whispered. Peck says so. Station Gamma is. I was breathing faster, my mouth and throat turning dry. Does anybody happen to agree with him? Some do. Not everybody, no. Why not? Because the energy levels are tiny. She named a group of lesser researchers. An alliance had formed around this single issue. She repeated their arguments as if they were her own. The power usage is minuscule. Doesn't seem to be a pattern. And nobody, not even Peck, has a clue about how to talk to the machine, control whatever it's doing just now. Yet I had faith in Peck. I'd spent 1 hour of my life with the man, enjoying none of it. I knew his mind was as relentless and sharp as it could be, and his word outweighed the judgment of 1,000,000 skeptics, so far as I could tell. What are you thinking? Catherine asked. By chance, I just touched her belly, fingers skimming along the crease of the old scar. For every good reason, I said, nothing important. I'm not thinking anything. She probably assumed I was wondering about her vanished child, and grateful that I didn't pursue the matter, she swung a leg over me and took the initiative, giving this old man 10 or 15 minutes of fun. 3 days after that, Catherine said, another theory dies. Which one? The one where the alien machinery is working, she reminded me. Now Peck says he was wrong. He was fooled. Transient propagations of electricity, he says it was. I just made a mistake. The castle's dead as dead can be. I imagined him saying those exact words in various voices. When they were close, I whispered, too bad. I don't think it's too bad, Catherine replied. I don't want alien machines doing mysterious jobs, thank you. Another 11 days passed before I could corner Peck. If swagger was something you wore, then the man had been stripped naked. I could tell as much from across the galley. He shuffled to an empty table. He set down his tray, then his body, his head bowed as he spent the next long while using his nylon fork punching holes in the helpless veal. I wasn't the only one to notice. A couple of the base mechanics were sitting beside me, good-natured boys who didn't mind an old engineer hanging around their shop when he was bored. Empathy wasn't their strong suit. One of them astutely observed, "Our resident Hawking looks kind of blue." "Kind of blue," his buddy laughed. "I'd keep him away from guns if it was my call. Know what I mean?" Too well I understood the implications. "I hear he got his ass chewed pretty well today," said the first boy. "A real mastication," said the other, sounding infinitely pleased. "When was that?" I asked. "A few hours back," the first mechanic said. "You were visiting your daughter's room. You probably didn't hear that other screaming." They liked teasing me about Catherine. I like to believe that they were jealous. "Who did the screaming?" I asked. "The Pentagon suits, then the general, then the suits again." The kid made a show of shrugging his shoulders, explaining, "This isn't a big place. You don't have private meltdowns." "Our prick genius isn't performing," said the second boy. "Billions spent and nothing to show for it." Just then I made my choice and acted on it. "Where you going?" both asked in a rough chorus. "I'm going to have a chat with Peck." And I threw them a wink, adding, "I'll sit with him until he insults me." "See you in 30 seconds, the first mechanic kidded. But really, the man didn't have enough energy for abusing anyone, except for himself. He barely looked up when I settled across the table. After a lot longer than 30 seconds, he finally managed to ask, "What?" "So the castle's dead, is it?" "Nothing. Catherine told me. You thought you had something big at Gamma, but you didn't. Then you had to announce to everybody you were wrong." His face lifted. His expression was drunken, tired, and sorry. The strangeness gathered up behind the eyes. I couldn't tell what I was seeing, much less what it meant. Even when I made guesses, they fell miles short. "I was surprised," I admitted. "With what?" He spoke in a dry whisper. I can imagine you admitting to an error, sure. I can see that happening. But it's the phrasing. Catherine quoted you. I just made a mistake," which didn't sound like you. Those aren't your normal words. The tone in her voice didn't seem like you either. "What tone?" I took a moment. "Suppose we're playing cards. Okay? You make a lot of noise when you push your chips into the middle. Then you lay back in your chair and smile too much." "What are you talking about?" "Bluffing," I said. Peck might have been one of the world's great minds, but at a poker table I would have destroyed him. He heard me say bluffing and shrank down a little bit, eyes bouncing left and then right, hunting for a friendly place to hide. "The castle isn't dead, is it?" He tried silence. "Catherine didn't pick up on it, but to me, you sounded a little too confident about your failure. A guy like you, being wrong, should have chewed at you. Just to prove that you could, I would expect you to generate 10 new hypotheses in the next little while." He maintained his uneasy silence. "Were you bluffing, Doctor?" And he chewed his bottom lip, saying everything. I made a show of grabbing my tray but not rising. Then with a voice that I hoped nobody else could hear, I asked, "Do you want me to go to the general and give him a poker player's observation?" "And what would you tell him? What's your best guess here?" "You did discover something. I don't know what, but you did. You don't want to share your news with anybody." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because you want it for yourself. By nature, you're a greedy soul. Somehow you piece together some corner of this puzzle. You're acting like the little boy who can't share his toys." Peck almost laughed. And he caught himself, and after a moment's hard reflection, he admitted, "I do hate sharing the limelight. That's true." I started to nod, glad to be right. "Except that's not the problem here," he said. With the tray still in both my hands, I started to push back my chair. "Stay," he told me. I relaxed my back, then my fingers. "You think I'm a bastard. I know. Arrogant and self-absorbed and all the rest." "What of it?" "You were a government man once, Craig. Well, in my case, I've never been. I'm just a hired hand brought here because of my talent, because they knew I would agree to almost anything to be involved in this work." The first scientist to peer inside an alien treasure box, I offered. With a gesture, he pushed my words aside. Then with an even quieter voice, he said, I doubt that the castle is alien, Craig. It's not alien in the ways most people envision it. What do you know? I pressed. Why aren't you sharing your inspirations with these other children? I'm not government. I'm certainly not military, Peck told me. And sure, I am a prick. I got 2 ex-wives that will say the same thing. That doesn't mean I lack ideals or that I lack limits. When something huge comes my way, like the A-bomb came to Oppenheimer, I feel morally obligated to ask myself, what is the right thing to do? Okay, I said. What makes the castle so awful? Peck's mouth opened, but no words wandered out. And why the miserable act today? I gave my question several moments to work at him. Then I saw an obvious answer. The big boys are trying to take you out of the game, aren't they? You can't give them the answers they want. They're threatening to steal away your precious bauble. His old pride bubbled again. And who'd replace me? You? I let his insults slide. But they are threatening to cut my powers and rein me in. So you found a new A-bomb? I asked. And he shrank down again. The tight, sorrowful voice, Peck said, I wish it was a bomb. A world-killing weapon. Because then I would know exactly what to do next. I was 13 when Donnie's father remarried. The lucky woman was younger than him, young enough that their union just missed becoming a scandal. The newlyweds lived down the block from an outraged teenager. By then, my sister was lost to a mysterious money-grubbing cult. By then, my parents were emotional wrecks. The kindest words about religion in our household were cranky statements about people being certified idiots, eating any lie as long as it made them feel less miserable. A few days after turning 14, I saw a cheap cardboard sign planted on Donnie's yard. It's a boy, I read. The birth was no surprise, since the young wife had been showing for what seemed like half a year. But even today, I can recall my gut-wrenching horror when I heard that the infant child had been named Donald, and that my dead friend's bedroom had been transformed into Donald's nursery. For a couple of years, I managed to avoid that house and its insane inhabitants. My habit was to walk or ride my bike in inconvenient directions, and if I saw one or more Warner in public, I used every trick to escape notice. Looking back, I'm appalled at my behavior. Really, they made a sweet, silly couple. Donnie's father was an angular, middle-aged man, a tiny, somewhat drab face that seemed grateful for every good thing in his life. He had survived the death of his first family. Now he was working hard to convey a sense of peace. To a glowering adolescent, he looked altogether too happy. His laughter was cheap. He made too much of a show of loving his young wife, holding her hand or keeping a long arm over her pudgy little shoulder, kissing her on the ears whenever I saw them at the grocery store or in the park. She sounded like any happy, fertile mother, pregnant twice again before I could finally abandon the old neighborhood. Once I was in college, I would come home for only a few weeks in summer, a few days around Christmas. On a snowy afternoon in December, I drove in from the inconvenient direction, according to my habit. While getting out of my car, I noticed a new sign propped up in Donnie's front yard. For sale, I read, at least 3 times. Oh, the Warners are divorcing, my mother explained. Then she quickly added, it's Polly's doing, not his. Polly? I asked, momentarily uncertain who that was. Her, the second wife. Mom laughed at my ignorance. He can't let go, Polly says, and she's sick of it. He's always praying to his dead family. They won't let Tom be called Tom. Who's Tom? The boy. Donald Thomas. The gossip had a good, rich flavor in the mouth, but another question begged to be asked. How do you know what he does and what she wants? Oh, Paula is one of our best friends, my mother reported. Then my father, who was standing in the wings, burst in to report, she's coming to dinner, by the way, with the kids. Slapping me on the back, he added, you know, she's been asking about you, Craig. I was outraged, but trapped. What does she want to know about me? I muttered. Nothing special, Mom assured. Then she dropped plates into my hands, telling me, set the table now. 7 spots, okay? It didn't escape my notice that the famous Polly wasn't many years older than my vanished sister. It didn't take long to realize she was nothing like what I had assumed her to be. She didn't pray before dinner. She didn't once mention God or Christ as a personal friend. Her missing husband was discussed, in code if the kids were present. If they were downstairs tearing apart the basement, she was more open about their ongoing problems. I knew it was dangerous, foolish, silly, Polly confessed, looking in my general direction even when she was speaking to my parents. I should have run away when he insisted that we live inside his house. I couldn't agree more. He always says he's happy and at peace, but really he's barely begun grieving. Regardless of what he says, and God says, he's still a miserable mess. I wanted to escape, but I couldn't dream up any useful excuse. So I sat in the living room with a 30-ish woman, pudgy and plain, with bright, sensible eyes and a knowing voice that I found oddly appealing. I finally asked, "So, are you Christian?" Both of my parents smiled in a sly fashion. "I was," she said. Then with her own buoyant grin, she said, "Maybe I still am. I hope not. I know for a fact that I've never been half the believer my husband is." "That must piss him off," I offered. She nodded and sighed, and with some satisfaction she said, "In so many ways." Then she stared at me, and out of nowhere she asked, "You knew Donnie well, didn't you?" Hardly at all, I could have said. That would have felt like an honest answer. I knew him years ago. We weren't close for very long. But instead of that, I admitted, he was a friend. I dipped my head. "By far he was my husband's favorite," she mentioned. "My own son is a pale shadow next to his Donnie. Just wait until we reach heaven, I've been told. Then we'll meet him and understand what a saint that boy was, and is." I felt sick and tired, and under everything else furious. Polly studied me for a long moment. Then she took the trouble to touch me on my hand, saying, "It was difficult for you, of course." "Not really," I lied. "Do you believe you'll see Donnie in heaven?" I laughed bitterly. Then in a crisp fashion I described my journey to his bedroom and his father's praying beside me. My parents hadn't heard that story. They were predictably outraged. But Polly absorbed my news without surprise. She knew the man better than any of us, and that was in his character. After I was done telling my story, she leaned in closer, asking, "Do you believe that you will see your friend again?" Until that moment, I didn't even suspect that I wanted to see Donnie. But I did, desperately. All at once, I was sobbing like a little kid. The wise young mother threw her arms around me, hugging me while my parents sat apart from us, stunned by the boy's secret grief. And that was the moment, after too many delays, when I finally began the slow business of getting over Donnie. Lights were burning up ahead. As we approached the brilliance, I saw two physicists wearing spacesuits hunkering over a bizarre piece of apparatus. The object looked like a box bristling with senseless holes and random black wires. Naturally, I assumed it was one of the castle's mysterious machines. Then one of the physicists cursed and threw a punch at the plastic housing. "Careful," Peck remarked. In the hard vacuum, it was impossible to tell a voice's direction. Both men first looked down the long passageway. They turned together, seeing us bearing down on them. Again, Peck told them, "Be careful." The less angry researcher stood up straight and named the apparatus, a nonsensical string of syllables, as far as I could make out. I had no clue what the marvelous device was supposed to do, but according to the fellow's testimony, it wasn't working. Everything checked out fine. For some damnable reason, they couldn't even do a calibration run. "Keep at it," was Peck's advice. The two men nodded, and suddenly they noticed me trailing behind. "I want Craig's input on something," Peck offered, explaining nothing. "We're going to be at Gamma for a while. I want you to try everything before you give up here, understand?" We bounce-walked past before either man could respond, the lamp on our helmets casting a single bobbing light. "Some of our equipment works fine inside the castle, which is damn fortunate." My companion had switched to a private, heavily scrambled frequency, holding a steady pace. There was a slight downward tint to the gray-white hallway, but the footing was reliable. He skipped along, telling me, "I suppose the castle could be tinkering selectively, screwing up sensors that might tell us something useful." "Does the castle think?" I asked. "Probably not." Peck slowed a little and turned his shoulders to look back at me, his lamp making me blink. "Somebody else does the thinking. That's my current hypothesis." "Who's that somebody?" "I'm not naming names," he said. "Sure. What we've been seeing here can be explained, at least to a degree. He turned forward again, bouncing along even faster. That box of widgets they're kicking? It studies force that operates across fantastically tiny distances. Our guess of the moment is that one or more hidden dimensions have been expanded inside the castle, or twisted down to where we can see it, maybe. How gravity operates here is going to give us a good clue, if they can collect meaningful data. And what do the new dimensions mean? Well, for one thing, they could explain the incredible strength of this place. If the castle extends far out into the multiverse, the realms we normally can't see or interact with, then our normal forces might bleed off in harmless directions. These walls could weather the worst abuse humans are capable of producing, maybe. But who could build such a thing? The passageway had reached an abrupt end, a human-built door standing in our way. Peck punched in an oversized keypad with the fat fingers of his glove, and the airlock's outer door pulled open. We stepped into the vacuum beyond, and again he offered up a code. The door closed, and air began pouring in from some hidden reservoir. We stood as close as shy dancers, and once again I asked, "Who could manage this kind of work? Do you have candidates?" Peck looked straight ahead. "Oh, yeah." I kept quiet. The outside air stopped whistling. As soon as I had a green light, I pulled off my helmet, hanging it beside my new friend's helmet. Then we stepped into a surprisingly large chamber, the biggest space I'd enjoyed since arriving on the moon. Permanent lights came to life as we moved. The air was dry and a little too warm, but clean. Near the airlock was a small hill of supplies, food and bottled water, computer pads and paper pads, plus several top-grade digital cameras, each wearing a label that said malfunctioned. At the far end of the room was the portable thorium reactor, tucked inside a sleeve of regolith concrete and ready to power any job. In the room's center, maybe 20 lunar strides away from me, was an object that could have been a machine, unless it was a piece of sculpture, or it was neither, of course. Catherine had prepared me for a black mystery, but the truth was I felt disappointed. I'd imagined a rich velvety blackness that would swallow my gaze and threaten to engulf my soul, but instead the machine was glossy, almost shiny, a complicated set of flat obsidian surfaces forming an odd donut surrounding a spherical object that looked large at a distance and quite small up close. Without sound, the ball hovered above the gray-white floor, a slight reddish cast to its blackness. From every point of view, that strange ball occupied the same space in my eye. If I pushed my face against it, the ball would turn into a speck. That was one of the early experiments performed by the polymath standing beside me. Against the wishes of colleagues and the general, Peck had said, "I want a closer look," and clambered over the donut sides. He was a brave soul. I'd grant him that. "Nobody can see us here," the brave soul reported, taking what seemed to be his usual position before one of the flat black surfaces. They tried installing cameras, thermal sensors and microphones. Security tools, they call them, but they never worked very long. "You're sure?" I asked. "Absolutely. Since I'm the culprit who disabled each one of them." Peckett unsealed and removed his glove, and now he set his bare palm against the donut's shiny surface. A set of controls appeared. Suddenly I saw simple buttons and numbers, some kind of projection of what looked like a tiny point highlighted inside a much larger sphere. What made that happen? Not my hand, if that's what you're asking. A smile softened his normal intensity. Other people touched this surface, plenty of times. The key seems to be here. He tapped his own forehead. If you know enough, or at least if you make the right assumptions, the display is built for you. It's designed to perfectly match your knowledge as well as your limitations. I stared at his controls, 1,000 questions begging to be asked. "Suppose you can escape our 4 constrictive dimensions," Peck began, anticipating my first query. That's what I was asking myself. From outside our space-time, wouldn't everything be visible? The omniscient observer could examine every location in the universe, every instant in time. "You were thinking that?" "I was considering the possibility," he explained. "Sitting here, I was making various assumptions and calculations, trying to find the sense in this conundrum. When I touched the surface, the controls appeared, perfectly comprehensible to me, which is only reasonable since they matched my brain's expectations and its finite abilities. I glanced at the next empty surface on the obsidian donut. Think of time, Peck suggested, and think of the castle as if it exists outside of time in our flat little neighborhood. With my bare hand, I touched what felt like cold glass. Nothing appeared. You're not quite there, he remarked. After a moment's consideration, he said, make a guess. Who would want to build this contraption? Martians? Peck shrugged his shoulders. Do you want to know the plain truth, Craig? I can't imagine any kind of alien that would go to this trouble. Not for human beings, they wouldn't. So who? He didn't reply. How about God? I asked. That's what your lady friend believes. This is all God's doing. My eyes instantly grew huge. Don't act surprised, Craig. After our conversation the other day in the galley, I came here and did research. I wanted to understand you better, see if I could trust you. I've been replaying your last several weeks, watching you and Catherine discussing me. You looked into our bed. If it's any consolation, he said, I focused on faces and voices because, frankly, I'll tell you, I'm not eager to see either one of you naked. You looked back in time? Yes. Goddamn, I whispered. He calmly waved my consternation aside, adding, if there is a God, Craig, I cannot find him. And believe me, I've been sitting here for days searching. With this amazing tool, I've hunted up each of the old prophets. I've watched them preach and eat, screw and cheat. I've seen all of them eventually die. I'll tell you this, too. Not one of them accomplished a single credible miracle. Not that I can find. They were ordinary men and extraordinary salesmen. They convinced other people to follow them. After death, they did nothing but rot. That was exactly what I had always believed, what I'd been taught since birth. Yet a distinct disappointment arrived with that sorry news. If God lives, Peck continued, he's even less likely to intrude in human lives than aliens would be. Which leaves us with one viable candidate, Craig. The only entity that truly cares about human beings. Which would have to be us. He laughed, shaking his head slowly. Only people care enough about people to make such an enormous investment. Humans built this? I whispered. Humans will build it. In some remote future, or in a parallel universe. Who can say for sure when? I felt numb. Think about it this way, Craig. To our future selves, time is just another malleable dimension. Whatever their reasons, our descendants will build this amazing object, and they will set it where we won't find it until we are ready. I shook my head. Aren't there some mighty paradoxes on the prowl? You mean because if they sent it back through time, that's to change the future and maybe destroy them in the process? No, Craig. That's old-time thinking about temporal matters. The universe is defined by quantum mechanics. Reality is constantly dividing into a multitude of pathways. As soon as their gift arrived here, from whenever or whatever and wherever that was, an entirely new history was created, separate from the existence our benefactors experienced. So what exactly is their gift? Maybe it's a blessing they're offering us a portion of their enormous power. Or maybe it's some kind of elaborate, horrible curse. At this point, I don't have opinions one way or the other. Again, I touched the glassy flat surface. Simple controls appeared, happened so quickly that my mind half believed they'd always been there, begging to be noticed. The display showed me a specific date and hour and a location that I recognized immediately. I did the math, and my belly tightened into a knot. Then, almost as a reflex, I touched the broad green button. When I looked up, I discovered that from my perspective, the black sphere had vanished. In its place, I could see my mother, exceptionally alive and young, lying naked in a rumpled bed, while my father, wearing only a sweaty t-shirt, lay panting beside her, muttering something like, okay, and then, that was pretty nice. The newly pregnant woman coughed into a tiny fist. Then she pulled the covers over herself. With a voice that I knew better than my own, asked, by the way, did you remember to lock the front door? The front door of my childhood home was latched and securely locked. But fat good that does when you're trying to stop voyeuristic entities that exist outside time and space. Entities such as me. Peck muttered gibberish in my direction. I turned toward him, my expression perplexed and enthralled. Human history, he said to me, his face betraying a humbled, undiminished astonishment. From this vantage point, You and I can observe everything that has ever happened to our species. I've watched the first Homo sapiens running across an African valley. I've seen pyramids built on 2 continents. I've seen wars and concentration camps and nuclear blasts. Wherever humans have stood, we can stand. We can witness every act that people have unleashed, hear every sound that we have made. There's even an effective translator function. Push closer, whispering. Languages no living man has heard. They can be turned into functional mid-century American. I stepped back away from the donut, legs shaking. My postcoital parents lingered, but their features softened, and their spent voices fell away into soft, incoherent murmurs. How long have you known? I asked. 13 days. Nobody else? No. So I offered the obvious question. Why me? Because you've got experience with the world and you seem skeptical by nature. And most important, you aren't genuine military. Whispering again, he asked, can you imagine what kind of intelligence weapon this would make? Armed with a tool of this magnitude, a person or government would have an open window onto everybody's life. I nodded, imagining possibilities both grim and wondrous. I don't really know you, Craig. What I've seen of you tells me that I can trust you to help. What have you seen of me? Peck hesitated, his crooked smile wavering. Have you watched my life? It's remarkably easy, picking up a person's existence, following it through its high points. I was embarrassed and I was thrilled. It took me several moments to find my voice again, warning him. They'll learn what you're doing here. Tomorrow or next week, one of your colleagues down in Alpha or Beta is going to figure this puzzle out. The general is going to follow through with his threats, curbing your little freedoms. Oh, everybody's suspicious, he admitted. I've been keeping close tabs on their conversations. I doubt if I have 2 days left to work however I want. So what were we talking about here? Telling the world what we know, obviously. Otherwise, there will be people who will shut a heavy lid over this place, button it up and keep it to themselves, for decades, maybe for centuries. And maybe that would be best, I allowed. Panic took hold. With a quick, worried voice, he tried to sweeten the prospects. Imagine, Craig, a world where the past is just as visible and immediate as the present is. Sure, I agree. It's going to cause a huge upheaval. 20 upheavals, maybe. People are going to lose all their ancient ideas about human origins and God and our mythic heroes. But after a few years, a generation or two at the very most, we'll find ourselves with a new society, an honest, enlightened society. There won't be any awful secrets anymore. This will be the only holy site. Scholars from every nation will come to the castle to study and learn. The lessons of 100,000 years will be shared equally with every citizen. At least that's how it should be. Maybe, I allowed. So do you have a plan here, Dr. Visionary? With your help. Using a conspirator's voice, Peck said, every message I send home is being vetted. It's the same for you. Did you know that? They don't trust either one of us. But if we can get our news to the other bases on the moon, or even just a civilian-run U.S. settlement, then how do we manage that? He grinned, thrilled by my interest. Almost everything I've seen here, plus my explanations for the castle, several hundred hours of files in all, I've them copied into a dozen null-sync hard drives. From a food bin, he pulled out a camera that actually worked, then handed me one of the bullet-shaped devices. They're very durable and wonderfully small. What I can't do, and you can, since you're an engineer and all, you can step outside and play with the hardware that's scattered on the surface, the stuff we use to try to crack the castle's walls. My plan, and you'll appreciate this, Craig, is to cobble together a railgun. I'll supply the plausible excuse. I want you to shoot a hole in this panel, maybe, but instead of using it down here, I'm going to wrap my hard drives inside iron slugs and mark them with alarm beacons, and launch them in 5 carefully calibrated suborbital arcs. Clever, I offered. It's an elegant solution, Peck agreed, shamelessly applauding his scheme. People will eventually find one or all of those hard drives. And do you think that China or the French, or that our Pentagon, hold the castle for themselves? I had to admit, it might work. And if you launch the extra hard drives toward the Earth. The biggest railguns have enough kick. If we wrapped the iron inside ceramic envelopes to serve as heat shields. He hesitated before admitting, "This is your expertise more than mine, Craig. I should leave it to your capable hands to decide." I nodded, saying nothing. Peck glanced at my controls. "I'm going to walk back up and help my staff with their little experiment. I'll be gone 2 hours. As soon as you hear the airlock cycling through again, blank everything. That red button at the bottom should do the trick. At least that's how mine works." Just to make sure, I kicked the button, replacing my parents with a plain black ball. "And what do you want me to do until then?" I asked. "Play," Peck told me, as if nothing could be plainer. "Go whenever and wherever you want. Walk your life. Eavesdrop on the great moments in history. Whatever you do, I promise this much. After the first hour, you'll be an expert. That's how well built this system is." "Okay," I whisper. Then with a voice unaccustomed to trusting words, Peck told me, "I've got my faith in you." He let me keep the hard drive, showing me his hopeful smile before he turned and bounced toward the airlock. I needed less than an hour to see everything I needed to see. Another 20 minutes, and I was finished with my work. Pushing the red button, I cleared the last scene, pulled a fresh hard drive from the camera, put the camera back in its hiding place. I sealed my gloves and helmet. With 2 hard drives hidden inside a pocket, I passed through the airlock and marched up the long, unlit hallway. Fortunately, Peck was where he had promised to be, working on the bulky machine with his back toward me. Nobody noticed my presence until I was past. Except for a casual wave with my hand, I didn't signify their presence. A supply rover carried me back to base. I didn't bother trying to seem at ease. In a rush, I pulled off the suit and hurried underground, and at a certain door, I paused and knocked, wishing for a small measure of luck. Catherine said, "Yes." I entered her small cabin and set the lock. She was in uniform, minutes away from going on duty. Something about my mood and looks alarmed her. "Sit," she advised. Then, with a mixture of tenderness and revulsion, she asked, "Are you sick?" I produced the fresh hard drive and plugged it into her notebook. There's only one file on it, and before I punched play, I stared at her while saying, "Peck has the mystery solved. He wants to tell the world before he tells you." Her surprise was far from total. She sat up in her chair, nodding for a moment while coming to terms with some old suspicion. And then very quietly she said, "Thanks for coming forward." "Don't thank me," I interrupted. She glanced at the glowing screen, curious now. In the briefest possible terms, I outlined what I had just learned. Then I told her, "If you want, report both of us. Do it this minute. Or you can sit there for the next 15 minutes and watch your daughter while she plays in a dirty little sandbox. She's 6 years old, and I know for a fact she won't make 7. Catherine shrank down. I hit play and let the video run for nearly 10 minutes. Then Peck was at the door, knocking on it while saying our names over and over, his voice tense and urgent, trying hard not to sound desperate, but moving very much in that direction. I froze the image of a pretty child bearing her own legs under brown sand. And I leaned close to her, weeping mother, saying, "This isn't just a video. It's a piece of your daughter's entire life. Good and not, her whole life is waiting for you. Ask yourself this. If you report what you know now, what are the odds that you'll see any more of this girl? Ask yourself that, Catherine. And now make up your mind." I'm not the biggest name in this story. Peck made the discovery, after all. Catherine effectively ended her career when she used her rank to evade the normal vetting procedures, uploading Peck's hard drive straight home to the internet, in effect announcing this unexpected news to a thoroughly unprepared species. People still have to ask me, why didn't you just do what Peck suggested? Why not use a railgun and send off the hard drives like bullets? Because you're never sure where a bullet will end up. You can't know what the person who finds it will actually do. What if another base, or its government, simply decided to take the castle for itself? A war would break out on the moon, hundreds dying for a prize like none other. Who would envision what miserable future that would bring? No, I tell people, I did what I thought was quickest and safest, and more than most ways smartest. But Catherine was a believer, people like to remind me. The castle has made a lot of believers crazy. The ugly upheavals are still gaining momentum, sure. Every faith feels threatened by the castle, as well it should be. But I didn't approach Catherine with her God. I brought her daughter to her. I would argue that when given the chance, people believe mostly in people. Gods and souls are inventions to make us feel better about those we have lost. What if nobody is truly lost? If everyone who is born is always alive, if only in a different slice of time. And where did you figure that out, people have to ask. My final epiphany occurred after Peck left me alone. What do I want to watch? I asked myself. And my mind jumped back to that long-dead friend and the horrible suffering that he must have endured on his last night. When I started playing with the controls, I meant to watch the tragedy. Donnie would come to my house and get turned away. And somehow his depressed mother would manage to coax everyone into the car. Between her prayers and threats, what did she say to the older boys to keep them calm and compliant? How long did it take for the fumes to build up, for everyone to lose consciousness? Did Donnie weep? Did he call for me? What was I doing at that moment when his little body turned into nothing but mindless lost meat? Yet when I had my chance, I found myself searching out a different moment. Death is a very small part of life. If we have only a little time to look at anyone's existence, yours or some shy kid from 3rd grade, you would have to be pretty sick to seek out that kind of nightmare. I spent an hour doing nothing but watch Donnie playing with me in my bedroom. I stared at that little black-haired boy, and I cried hard. Somewhere in the midst of that bland normalcy in those pleasantly wasted minutes, I realized nothing dies, because nothing ever ceases. To me, that's what the castle means. I saw this child that was once me pushing a toy battleship across the shag carpeting, while his best friend maneuvered a 1,000-foot robot over the ocean's golden surface, each making his silly little sounds of cannons and ray guns blazing away. Those boys are there now, safely contained in that impregnable, eternal moment. And if you ever have the chance to see my old self watching that scene, here's all you need to know. I told myself that if a mother didn't want to risk her rank and career for the chance to see her daughter again, and she was never much of a mother, we probably wouldn't be much of a species either. And if I were wrong about Catherine, I decided that we surely deserved our ignorance and idiocy now into the last of our sorry, perishable days.